The solicitor cleared his throat, adjusting the spectacles that magnified his indifferent eyes. The mahogany table reflected the sterile light of the room, and around it, my cousins shifted, their greedy anticipation a palpable heat. Uncle Silas was finally gone. $35 million in play. The bulk of the estate, the solicitor announced, his voice a dry rustle of paper, is bequeathed to the Global Ocean Conservation Fund. A collective strangled gasp filled the air. My cousins' faces, Alastair, Veronica, and Charles, went from eager pink to a poisonous white. Then came my name. To Daniel, the deceased leaves one item, a red metal toolbox currently held in the estate's storage. Alastair scoffed, a loud phlegmy sound of contempt. Veronica snickered, hiding it behind a manicured hand. "Typical loser gets the junk," Charles muttered, loud enough to ensure I heard it. I did not react. I simply nodded once, accepting the rust-pocked relic the solicitor slid toward me. It weighed far more than it should have. That was the only variable that mattered. The emotional abuse was background noise. The toolbox was the variable. I drove home with the metal box rattling beside me. My cousins' immediate rage, their shouting, their accusations against the deceased, was the predictable performance of predictable minds. I, however, had been waiting for this moment for 20 years. Silas was eccentric, yes, but never meaningless. He hated my cousins with the pure, cold intensity of a strategic mind. This wasn't an insult. This was a signal. I set the toolbox on my workbench. It was an ordinary box, filled with cheap, rusted hammers and wrenches. But the weight was wrong. I tipped it, ran my hand along the bottom. It felt unnaturally thick, solid. I grabbed a thin-bladed utility knife, inserted it into the seam where the metal base met the sides, and began to work. Slowly, quietly, no frantic desperation, just precision. The base popped free with a dry clack. It wasn't solid metal, it was a false bottom. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not cash, not jewelry, it was a single, sleek, black satellite phone. Old technology, military grade, totally untraceable. As soon as my fingers closed around the device, it sprang to life. A glowing green light. Then a sharp, insistent electronic ring. I lifted it to my ear. The voice was synthesized, flat, and utterly devoid of warmth. It felt like hearing Silas speak through a machine. "Congratulations, Daniel. You retrieved the key." I waited, my heart rate steady. The rest of the family believed the estate was $35 million. They were only off by a factor of 10. The real inheritance begins now. The call disconnected. I was left alone with the phone, the rusty toolbox, and the crushing realization Silas hadn't just ignored the cousins, he had played a vastly larger, deeper game. I immediately began investigating Silas's known financial structures, but this time with a new hypothesis. Everything was a lie. I cross-referenced the names of the charities in his will with old, obscure shell corporations he used in the late 90s. The Conservation Fund was a front, a perfect, clean paper trail to distract the vultures. I used the satellite phone. It had one contact programmed, the handler. I sent a single text, "Toolbox is open." The handler replied, "Check the Cayman account listed under Ocean Fund. Account activity starts T plus 48 hours. I hacked into the Cayman registrar using an old, convoluted system Silas had once taught me as a child. The Ocean Fund was registered 2 days before his death. Its assets were zero. But the beneficiary of the fund was a corporation named Vulture Point Holdings. And the registered owner of Vulture Point Holdings was none other than Alastair, Veronica, and Charles, my greedy cousins. My blood went cold. Silas hadn't cut them out. He had set them up to receive the real money, $350 million, through an elaborate, untraceable structure. Then, the final, terrifying detail came into focus. The terms of the Vulture Point Holdings deed were absolute. The funds were only released if the original will was successfully probated within 90 days and if no secondary claim was filed against the estate. A secondary claim. My claim. The claim that would expose their hidden wealth and freeze the transfer. The handler called again. T+1 hour. The transfer begins. The time for quiet investigation was over. I needed to move with surgical speed. My cousins were celebrating their imminent wealth, thinking they had won the moment I walked away with the junk. I called the solicitor, interrupting his lunch. I need to file an urgent claim against my Uncle Silas's estate. Full review of the charity and all related holdings. The solicitor, momentarily ruffled, stammered, "Daniel, what grounds?" "The grounds," I cut him off, my voice steady, "are an unregistered, undisclosed asset in the amount of $350 million, transferred into a shell corporation owned by my cousins, the sole purpose of which was to evade estate tax and bypass the rightful heirs." A long silence. "You have proof, Daniel?" "I have the toolbox, and the phone, and the logs. File it now, freeze the transfer, or I report this failure of disclosure to the state bar." I hung up. No negotiation. The next hour was chaos. My phone lit up with calls from the cousins. I let them ring. I watched the clock tick down. 2 days later, the headline was brief, sterile, "Harrison Estate Funds Frozen, Pending Investigation." The $350 million was locked. My cousins' faces in the news photo were a portrait of pure, agonizing loss. They had been within seconds of receiving their fortune, only to have it snatched by the one person they dismissed. I looked at the toolbox. The phone was dark now. Silas's revenge was never about giving me the money. It was about giving me the power to stop them from getting it. He knew their greed would be their undoing. I finally threw the rusty hammer from the top tray into the bin. I kept the box. I kept the phone. I didn't need the money. I needed the control. My inheritance wasn't the millions. It was the knowledge that I alone had the key. And they would never know the full extent of the game they lost. The tools of a true winner are never obvious.